Today we're going to be doing an unboxing and review of the brand new HTC One, aka the M8, aka HTC's newest device. Now before we jump in, if you would like to win a brand new HTC M8 or a brand new Samsung Galaxy S5, be sure to comment and like this video. Full details are going to be in the description below. We're actually announcing the winner over on Twitter. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into this video. So, taking a look at the packaging, you have the brand new HTC One on the front. We have the Verizon variant, so we also have a Verizon Wireless logo. Flipping it over, you have a couple more specifications on the phone, as well as just some more branding on there. Going ahead and sliding off this outer sleeve, we're greeted with a blank white box. If you lift up the top, you're going to be greeted with the HTC One in all of its aluminum glory. Pulling the phone out, we then have the micro USB cable, headphones, as well as a Powerwall AC adapter. And then on your left, you're going to have your startup guides and health information and all of that fun manuals that you could probably never read through. And then right up top, you're going to have your SIM ejector tool. So looking at the phone itself, you have a 5-inch 1080p display. It has a pixels per inch count of 440, and that's really great. Right in front of the screen, you're also going to have the boom sound speakers, which are facing towards you. They're actually going to be 25% larger than the speakers found on the HTC M7 or the original one. Now, you're also going to have a 5-megapixel wide-angle front-facing camera. Looking at the very bottom, you have your micro USB port. It is only 2.0, which is kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, USB 3.0 in phones is just starting to catch on. You have your 3.5mm headphone jack as well. Then all the way up top, you have an IR blaster as well as your sleep-wake switch. Now, what's really good about the IR blaster this year is they actually incorporated it into the entire top of the phone. So instead of just being a little speck on top of the sleep-wake switch, it's actually the entire top, and they've built this into this nice glossy black design, and it really works. On the right of the phone, you have the volume rocker as well as the SD card slot, and I honestly couldn't tell you how happy I am that they included SD on this phone. On the left-hand side, you have your micro SIM slot as well. And now, flipping the phone over is actually where everything kind of gets crazy and the phone disembarks from a normal smartphone. You have these two sensors, and it's being called their duo camera. So one of them is a 4-megapixel ultra pixel camera, and then on top of that is kind of like a depth sensor, basically allowing you to incorporate HTC software to refocus after the fact, as well as create these 3D-like images. We're going to show you a little bit more later in this video. They've also kind of taken the idea from Apple with the two-tone flash, and I really like that. I really hope every phone in the future has this feature. I personally use an iPhone, and I think it's just a great feature. It allows so when you're taking a photo in the dark, it kind of captures two different temperatures of light, so you really get the best photo. Not that flash is ever the best solution for anything, but it definitely helps when it's needed. You have your HTC logo. On our model, again, it's Verizon, so you have Verizon and the 4G LTE. So to just round out the final specs on the phone, underneath the display is a quad-core 2.3 GHz Snapdragon 801 processor. It's pretty much the newest, greatest, best you can have right now. There's 2 GB of RAM, which is kind of debatable. I'd really wish they put 3 gigs on here, but you know, it is what it is. HTC did include the Adreno 330 graphics, which is really nice because this phone kind of flies on the graphics scale. You're also going to have your normal LTE, NFC, and all the features you've come to expect from any Android phone. Speaking of Android, it's running Android 4.4 KitKat with HTC's Sense 6.0 layered on top. So we're really getting up there. We've really started from HTC Sense all the way back on like the Evo and the HTC Dream and all those older devices, and now we're all the way up to Sense 6. It's kind of crazy, just the way everything has changed through the years. So the HTC One is running Android 4.4, and it has Sense 6.0 layered on top of it. Now, as far as software, that means you're getting blink feed as well as a lot of different UI optimizations. I really did enjoy Sense 6. I personally am a stock Android type of guy. However, Sense 6 really does make everything look pretty nice. So they've really flattened a lot of the UI elements. So if you're going through the settings or really just looking at any sort of menu, a lot of the text, the typography throughout the OS is just looking very, very clean, very modern, and I mean, if this makes any sense, it looks very HTC. It's almost what we've come to expect from them, and they've definitely followed, as far as software-wise, how well the hardware looks on the outside. Now, Blink Feed is really nice. Last year in Sense 5.0, Blink Feed was introduced, and it was a bit intrusive. They kind of forced it on you, and they've definitely toned it back a little bit this year, giving users more of an option to use it. It's not really on the forefront of your home screen. It's actually a different page, which is really nice. Basically, it allows you to curate different sources of news from either social media networks or actual RSS feeds, and it kind of just throws it together in a flipboard fashion. It's really nice, especially if you're always wanting to keep up to date with what's going on. I personally did enjoy using it. Now, another feature they're adding in this year is an addition to HTC's Zoe. So Zoe is basically a sharing service for the camera. You can kind of share snippets of what you're doing, and now they're actually going to make that into an application. So the app's going to be available this summer, and it's going to be more of like a social media aspect. And it's going to be very interesting. I've kind of always wondered where they're going with this. A lot of the camera features on this phone are kind of there, but not really useful. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the camera section of this review. Other than that, HTC has incorporated a little bit more health into their software now. You can actually integrate a bit deeper with the Fitbit bands, allowing you to view and track your health, steps, everything like that throughout the day at just kind of a glance. Instead of having to dive into the Fitbit application, it just brings it more so to the forefront of what you're doing. I mean, overall, I really did enjoy it. I had a pretty good time using this phone. As far as the software goes, I mean, it was very snappy. The Snapdragon processor definitely helped to fly things along, as well as the Adreno 330 graphics. It's almost weird because I'm used to these software overlays just kind of slowing down the phone and making the device just kind of chug along, but now that we have such high-end specs that the software isn't being affected by the lower end hardware, it's really interesting to see how these companies have began to optimize their interfaces and really make them useful, because we're not really complaining about them so much anymore as we are just using them and enjoying it. I also really like the fact that HTC included the on-screen buttons this year. It's definitely a big thumbs up. I've really been all about that since the Galaxy Nexus when that was announced. So it's just really nice to see that HTC is really following suit with a lot of the complaints that people have had, and really just taking the idea of what users want. With that, they've actually opened up an API for Blink Feed, allowing developers to actually integrate their applications within Blink Feed. It's really just nice to see HTC being very open and developer front about these devices. So what helps HTC's Sense 6 to look so great is really the display. So the device has a 5-inch display. It's 1080p, like I said, and the pixels per inch count is 440. Because there are so many pixels packed into this display, everything is so sharp. I mentioned the topography aspects before in this video, and it really just comes to life. Since you can get such sharp text, whether it's large or small, they really were able to incorporate that into this phone, making everything look very, very, very nice. And then, in addition to the UI elements looking really good, obviously watching video is going to look great. Color reproduction is pretty spot on. It's not an AMOLED display, so you're not going to have that crazy contrast or oversaturated colors. You're going to have everything looking very, very real to life. And that's great. I mean, I personally have enjoyed using this phone. It gets nice and bright, so if you're using it out in the sunlight, you're going to be fine from that. You're not really going to run into any glaring issues, pun intended. But really, the display does look very nice. It's going to be very accurate no matter what you're doing. If you're outside, if you're indoors, watching video, reading text, you're definitely going to enjoy it. And the 5-inch form factor is very, very solid. It's not too big, not too small. It's kind of just right. Okay, now let's talk about one of the most controversial features on this phone, and that's the camera. So, if I may, let's venture back a little bit into the original HTC One, the M7. It was a very, very solid phone with a beyond average camera. So HTC has began using this idea called ultra pixels. Basically, what that means is instead of jamming a ton of pixels into a camera, they're going to use 4 and they're going to make them physically larger, allowing more light to hit the sensor, giving you better photos in low light, and if you have a lot of light, giving you a lot of detail and just a very rich, vibrant experience, giving you a greater depth of field so the background is more blurred. In theory, it's a great idea. However, it's unfortunately not the best. The front-facing camera is 5 megapixels. It's basic, not ultra-pixel camera. It works fine. It's not going to blow anything out of the water, but your Snapchat pictures are probably going to look a little bit better than the iPhone taking the pictures. But really, this camera on the back, it's a 4 megapixel sensor. Yet again, it is the ultra pixel, and they've actually now added this feature called duo camera. So you have these 2 sensors on the back of the phone. One of them is actually going to be capturing depth. Really just giving the camera more information so that when you take a photo, you can actually go into the software and refocus after the fact. Unfortunately, I really wanted this feature to work a lot better than it did. It was very gimmicky, to say the least. When you used it to take a picture, basically what happens is the second you hit refocus, whatever your subject is instantly gets a bit sharper and the background blurs up a lot more. And what they're actually doing here is pretty simple. They're sharpening and creating their own Gaussian or motion blur effect to create more of an illusion that you're going in and out of focus like a light show camera. So just say you take a photo with an object in the forefront and in the background you have text. If you're too close to that object in the foreground and the background has text and it's not legible, when you try to refocus to that background, the text is still not going to be legible because it's not actually taking multiple pictures. It's taking one photo and then it's using more data that it's captured from the second sensor, as well as some software optimizations to try and, in a sense, refocus the photo. Again, it's a feature that sounds much better than it is. It works in some situations, but it just really depends on what you're trying to do. For most people, the camera is going to be fine. It's going to take a decent photo, but it's honestly the truth that photos are going to look nicer on the phone than on a computer screen or on anything with a higher resolution or anything that stretches out pixels or it's not as pixel dense. It really just looks better on the phone, and that's not good. If you're sharing these photos to Facebook, sure, 4 megapixels is more than enough for online social media sharing. However, they just don't look that good. Pictures look undersaturated, and it's just really not exactly what we'd be expecting from this camera, especially when they're hyping these new features like dual camera and all that. It's almost more of a gimmick and a selling point than an actual functioning feature. Now, the software on the camera is pretty decent. It's very simple, very streamlined. It's nothing really complicated. It allows you to adjust different settings. You can go a little bit more manual as far as your controls go, or you can just kind of go full auto. You have your panorama mode, Zoe, as I mentioned before. You can switch to your front-facing camera. Video recording as well. You don't have 4K recording, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I think right now the current state of 4K on cell phones is kind of disastrous. Nothing really looks that good. There's no stabilization, and surely for that one feature, it just kind of ruins it for everybody. And until they kind of get the stabilization and all those optimizations worked out with 4K, then incorporating it into phones will be a better feature. The video camera on here is actually pretty good, and I definitely do enjoy that. I'm happy they didn't just throw 4K on there like most companies did just to say they have 4K, even though most people don't even have a 4K anything to display it on. And on a different note, we went ahead and ran some benchmarks. We did Antutu, Quadrant, Geekbench, and GFX Bench. We also put it up here against the Galaxy S5 as well as the HTC M7, so you can kind of see where the phone stands against last gen's hardware as well as Samsung's latest flagship. Battery life on the HTC M8 was actually pretty great. Throughout a full day's use, I got around 8 to 10 hours, kind of just depending on how hard I push the phone. So I really have just no complaints there. There's also a ultra power saving mode similar to how the Galaxy S5 works. Basically, it restricts a lot of the applications from running and kind of forces you down to just like the phone, messaging, calendar, calculator, as well as the HTC Mail application. You're going to have to manually refresh that one personally. So the way that this works is when your phone gets down to like 20%, 10%, 5% of battery life, it will dramatically improve your battery life, giving you a ton extra time so that if you need to make a call or if you're kind of in a tight spot and you don't have any charger, just flip your phone over to this manually, or once you hit down to that 20 or 10%, it'll do it automatically for you. Now, this feature is actually not available just yet for the HTC M8. It's going to be available soon with a software update. HTC said it's going to be coming in the next few weeks. But overall, the battery life on this phone is pretty great. It's definitely going to last a full day, and it's definitely something they've improved in over the original HTC One, the M7. And finally, let's go ahead and talk about some of just the new features on the HTC One. So, of course, like I mentioned before, we have Blink Feed, which is really just going to be the central hub for all of your news and everything like that. Blink Feed 2.0 was definitely a nice refresh from the original Blink Feed we saw on the M7. Again, it's not in your face, it's a little bit more subdued, and I definitely like that they're kind of not pushing it at you, they're giving it to you more as a feature and making it something that you're going to want to use instead of be forced to use. Also, the fact that it has an open API is really great. I really like that HTC is offering like developer versions of their phones and really staying true to the developers, allowing them to really help bring their phones forward and just make them a lot more enjoyable devices. Then in addition to that, you have the dual camera, which again, it's a bit gimmicky, but it is kind of cool. I mean, the ability to somewhat refocus your shot, it is fun to play around with, and the 3D effects are pretty interesting. It's kind of, again, it's something funny just to show your friends, or if you want to just really overdo it with a photo before you throw it on Instagram, you can kind of just play around with some of the software and tweak around with some of the settings and just kind of make a crazy looking image. But it is pretty interesting, and it's definitely a new concept that I'm kind of enjoying. Also, the fact that HTC has put an SD card reader on this phone is awesome. I am so sick of giving carriers more and more and more and more and more and more and more money just so I can have more storage on my device. And the fact that they were able to put an SD on here is just something that not only myself, but I'm sure a lot of people have been wanting. I know specifically with the M7, that was a pretty big complaint, and I really think that's a feature that needs to start coming back to every single phone. And SD should be one of those things that Android requires you to have because it is such a nice feature. I just love having it on my phone. And that's going to do it, guys. That's the HTC One. It's a very awesome device, very solid with superb build quality, an amazing looking display, and a pretty decent kind of subpar camera. The phone itself comes in a few different colors. You have this gunmetal gray, a silver, black, as well as gold. It's going to be available for $200 with a new tier contract. Right now you can go ahead and pick it up on Verizon Wireless, and it's going to be coming to just about all the major carriers. Anyways, guys, be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below. Let us know if you're going to be picking up a Galaxy S5 or the HTC M8, and which one do you think is better? Personally, we've actually done a comparison. If you want, you can go ahead and check that out. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and go ahead and check out all the M8 coverage we've done. We compared it to just about every major phone out there, as well as banged it up with a hammer and